Hello, folks. This week we're going to take a look at the song I Heard It Through the Grapevine. It's a fun song, it's a groovy song. There are a lot of cool versions of this song. The Gladys Knight and the Pips was the first release of the song after it was written, but Marvin Gaye's version is probably the most well-recognized. It's a soul classic. This lesson is going to focus in mostly on the Marvin Gaye recording of the song, but I'm also pulling in elements of the Creedence Clearwater Revival version from 1970, which is also a really rad version and translates nicely to the ukulele. So let's get started and see what the song sounds like. Bet you're wondering how I knew about your plans to make me blue with some other guy you knew before. Between the two of us guys, you know I love you more. It took me by surprise, I must say, when I found out yesterday. Oh, I heard it through the grapevine. Not much longer will you be mine. I heard it through the grapevine, and I'm just about to lose my mind, honey, honey, yeah. So we can approach this the same way that we would approach any song that we would have chords and lyrics for, like you have in the PDF. I Heard It Through the Grapevine, chords. So the chords we're working with are D minor, A7, G, we have a B minor, and we have a different version of G here, which is kind of extending from this B minor shape, and we'll talk about that a little bit more closely when we get there. But I could just strum through. It's in 4/4 time. I could just do 1, 2, 3, 4. Strum that way the whole way through. I bet you're wondering how I knew about your plans to make me blue with some other guy you knew before. Between the two of us guys, you know I love you more. Took me by surprise, I must say, when I found out yesterday. Oh, I heard it through the grapevine. Now, you can hear that works. It still sounds like the song, but it doesn't have the same groove. So that's a good way to kind of play around with it when you're getting started, getting a feel for it, just keeping that strum that you might be more used to. But what I find really brings out the groove of the song is focusing the power of my strums on beats 2 and 4. So the second beat and the fourth beat. And I'll usually execute that like so. I'm just gonna jam on the D minor for a little while here. So I could do just a soft strum on 1 and a harder strum on 2. I'm kind of thinking like the snare drum from a drum kit, where that's hitting, I'm also hitting. I'm kind of being an extension of the rhythm section, right? So the drums, bass, and rhythm ukulele to kind of just accent that beat. So I could go like this: 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Right? So there, I was lightly hitting the strings, and I also wasn't worried about hitting all of the strings on that first beat, right? So that first strum was kind of like a ghost strum almost. And the second strum, the second beat, I really followed through and gave it a little bit more power. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. So that's one way that we could handle this idea. We could also, the way that I typically will do it is I'm using 2 fingers, my thumb and index finger. And I think technically when I play this, I tend to use 3 fingers, index finger, middle finger, and ring finger together for that strum. I'll show you what that looks like. Again, sticking with the D minor here. For that first beat, that light strum, I'm just using my thumb. So I've got a thumbnail, so I could use that if I wanted a bright sound, but just the fleshy part of my thumb is fine. And that's beat 1. And then beat 2, I strum down all the strings with my either index finger or a combination of these 3 fingers. Let's look at the structure of these verses. It's mostly straightforward, but we have like a little twist happening. When we change from the A7 to the G comes a little bit earlier than we might expect. So let's look at those first few lines. 1, 2, 3, 4. Bet you're wondering how I knew about your plan to make me blue. Okay, that's where it happens. That G kind of like punches in a little bit early. Let's count out what those measures look like. So starting from the D minor. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Plans. 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. So we've got 2 full measures of D minor. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. And then the A7 happens. 1, 2, 3, 4. Like that. That G ends up coming in a beat, or yeah, one beat earlier than we would expect. Now it's in this first verse, that G is happening on the word blue, so you can use that as an indicator as well. If you're trying to play and sing at the same time and kind of working on the song from memory, chances are you're not going to be too focused on counting and making sure that it's all coming in. So using those kind of cue words to make those rhythmic adjustments is always pretty helpful. Let's move to the second line and play through that, and again listen for where that G comes in a little bit early. This time, instead of doing that syncopated feel, that 2 and 4 focus strum, I'm gonna just do downstrokes on all of the beats, just so we can hear where these changes are happening. Some other guy you knew before, between the 2 of us guys, you know I love you more. I'm going to take that from the beginning and do the same thing. I'm just going to strum on every beat and do those first 2 lines of the verse. 1, 2, 3, 4. Bet you're wondering how I knew about your plan to make me blue with some other guy you knew before. Between the 2 of us guys, you know I love you more. So more is going to be the key word that you're looking out for in the second line. Okay, let's move on to this bridgey portion here, because we have a little bit more syncopation going on here. It took me by surprise. We have that B minor chord. I must say, when I found out yesterday. So here, the G is coming in a little bit early, but this time instead of a whole beat early, it's just going to be a half a beat early. So it comes in a little bit quicker. So it's going to come in an 8th note early. It took me by surprise, I must say. It kind of like rushes in a little bit at the end. When I found out yesterday. Now that G happens just as normal, so you don't have to worry about that. Took me by surprise, I must say. All right, we got that quick jump to that G. Took me by surprise, I must say, when I found out yesterday. Oh, I heard it through the grapevine. The chorus is going to be pretty straightforward in terms of your strumming. If we're just keeping things simple, we can do, just our quarter note strum. I heard it through the grapevine. Not much longer would you be mine. Oh, heard it through the grapevine. And I'm just about to lose my mind. Honey, honey, yeah. And of course we can elaborate on that, and we will a little bit later in the lesson. But the basic structure is there. Let's try through the second verse. 1, 2. Know that a man ain't supposed to cry, but these tears I can't hold inside. Losing you would end my life, you see, 'cause you mean that much to me. You could have told me yourself that you love someone else. Instead, I heard it through the grapevine. Much longer would you be mine? Oh, I heard it through the grapevine. And I'm just about to lose my mind. Honey, honey, yeah. So same idea rhythmically, the same concepts were happening here in the second verse as they were in the first. Nothing structurally changes from verse to verse except for maybe how the melody is set within these verses. That gets played around with a little bit as we go. Let's take a look at the PDF. I heard it through the grapevine, riffs and rhythms. Now here we've got a bunch of tablature that we're going to walk through, but I also want to take this opportunity to look at a couple of the chords, particularly the B minor and this new version of G. All right, B minor can be a little tricky because it is a bar chord, and it's played like so. I have my index finger barred across the second fret of all my strings. So it's like a C6, but on the second fret. And then I'm going to add my ring finger onto the fourth fret of the G, like so. And I strum all my strings. Now, if you just bar the second fret there, you're going to get a chord called a B minor 7, and that's totally going to work in this song. So if getting this finger in place, getting your ring finger on the fourth fret of the G, is a little bit too much at first, especially quickly getting from one chord to the next, it's totally understandable. The B minor 7 is going to work just fine. Might even sound a little bit better. These minor seventh chords sound great in songs like this. But if we're playing this B minor, the regular B minor, for lack of a better term, we can do this transition from B minor to this G. So I'm playing B minor, and if I add my middle finger to the third fret of the E string, all of a sudden I have a G chord. Now it's the same G chord as we're playing over here. Sounds really, really similar too. And in fact, all the notes are the same. We are just doubling up on a different note now. So when we're playing this G right here, we are actually doubling up on our G note. I have my open G here and the third fret of the E string, which is the same exact note. So that note's just getting doubled when I play the G chord. When I play this version of G, the note that is getting doubled is no longer the G, because I'm not playing my open G anymore. Now, the fourth fret of the G string and the second fret of the A are the same note. cool. So now this B note is the note that's getting doubled. Again, we get that B note on the 4th fret of the G string, the same exact note on the 2nd fret of the A string. All right, so if it's the same chord, why bother using this different shape for the chord? There are a lot of good reasons to do that. The main one here being it's much easier to go from B minor to this G than to go from B minor and then reposition all your fingers to go over here. You can see that there's a lot more work going from here to here than there is just dropping a finger and going there. Now, that's not to say that you don't have to still do a jump to get back to that D minor, but, you know, we take things where we can get them, right? Another cool thing about this G shape right here, the fact that there are no open strings mean that it is a movable chord. So right here it's a G, but if I move it up 1 fret, I have an A flat all of a sudden. And if I move it up again, I have an A. I have a new version of A. And here's a B flat up here, a different version of B flat. So it becomes very useful whenever we're learning these bar chords. We're not just learning one chord, we're learning a bunch of chords all at once. So we're getting a lot of bang for our buck. Even though it might be a little bit harder to play, we're getting a lot of reward out of that. So, as you probably imagined, the B minor chord is also a movable chord. I can take that, and I can move that shape around the neck. So I have a B minor here. If I move down a half step, if I move down 1 fret, I have a B flat minor. There's a C minor, if I move it up here. C sharp minor, another D minor, E flat minor, so forth and so on. So again, you're getting a lot out of that work that you put into playing these bar chords. All right, with those chords out of the way, let's take a look at some of the tablature here. The first thing that's showing up is the riff. So a riff is a musical phrase that repeats in a song. Iron Man from Black Sabbath, you know, big stuff like that. The guitar part in Black Dog by Led Zeppelin. Those kinds of things. Usually, you know, it's very, with like rock music, especially classic rock. You know, you think of those AC/DC guitar lines and stuff like that. That's a lot of times what we'll associate with riffs, but it happens in all genres of music. So here, the riff that we're playing is that opening lick and repeating lick, usually being played by the bass in a lot of these recordings. Okay, so I'm playing the 2nd fret of the C string, and then I play it again. And then I move up to the 1st fret of the E string, and then back to 2nd fret of the C. So I'm just, at first measure, I'm just using these 2 notes. Now you'll notice that when I play the 1st fret of the E string, if I'm letting go of the C string there, I don't want my finger moving too far, because I know that I'm going to have to go right back there. So I could even leave these 2 fingers held down the entire time to play that bit. Now, I like to try and mute those strings when I'm not playing them, and I can do that fairly easily by just reducing the pressure of my finger. So when I'm playing the 2nd fret of the C, my index finger is relaxed. And when I play the 1st fret of the E, my middle finger is relaxed. So I'm applying pressure, and then I relax. So I'm not lifting my finger up, because if I lift my finger up, it'll kind of make the open C string sound out, and I don't want to do that. So all I'm doing is just relaxing my finger to stop the sound. So that's the first measure. The second measure, we don't play that 2 that's in the parentheses on the tab there. That is a held note, so it's being held from the last measure over into this new measure. And then once we get past that held note, we play this. So that's 2 strikes on the 2nd fret of the C, 1st fret of the E, and then open E. Now I'm moving my fingers out of the way so you can see what my fingers are doing. Normally I would still, again, keep them close, right? Now that rhythm, I want you to try and replicate that rhythmic feel. You are probably familiar with the bass line. It's a very iconic song, so it's probably something that you've heard before. But even if you haven't, give the recording a few listens and kind of internalize that rhythm. The count of the song goes like this. We have these 8th notes snuck in there. So when I'm counting, I want to try and count a 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and, to kind of accommodate when those 8th notes are happening, because we've got a little syncopation happening here. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. So that's the gist of that riff. I would say the first thing to do is just kind of get those frets under your fingers, get comfortable moving to those different frets. Get your right hand movements comfortable too. Most of the time when I'm playing something like this, I'm kind of bouncing between these two strings. I might use my thumb and index finger to pluck. I could also use my index finger and middle finger to pluck those strings. Next up, I want to take a look at the guitar intro from the Marvin Gaye recording. Now, this is basically the same idea as the riff that we looked at before, but the guitar is doing something a little bit different here. Now, in the Marvin Gaye recording, the bass is still playing what we played before, but here on the Marvin Gaye recording, that guitar at the very beginning of the song is playing that same rhythm, but with these little chord fragments, and it sounds like this. So we're moving back and forth between this shape. So I've got my middle finger on the 2nd fret of the C string and my index finger on the 1st fret of the E string. And the other chord is 3rd fret of the E and 2nd fret of the C. So you'll notice that I can leave these 2 fingers right where they are and just add my ring finger on the 3rd fret of the E when I need it. And again, it's going to be that same rhythm, so it would be the same count. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2. First and second. Jump up to that 3rd and 2nd. Back to 1st and 2nd. 2 hits on 1st and 2nd. And then we finish with 2 hits on 2nd and 3rd, like that. Next up, I've got some different ideas for performing the strumming of the song. So the verses, again, like we said before, to really get that groove of this song, I'm looking at playing the second and fourth beats of each measure. So that's expressed in this first section of the tab. So I've got a rest in the first beat, meaning I don't play anything, and in the second beat, I strum the chord. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, ideally, when we see those rests, we want to mute our strings. Rest. So here I'm just using my pinky to dampen those strings. We could do like that chunking sound, which is a different technique, which we'll talk about another time. But I like just the muting the strings. I could use my pinky like that. I could mute with this hand. I could mute with my palm, the side right there. But just to keep those notes from ringing out when I have a rest. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, you're not always going to have a finger available to mute. Don't worry, we'll talk about other techniques that we can use in the future. So we just walk through the tabs the same way before. Again, when I'm playing this, instead of having just a rest there, I do like plucking either just my G string or maybe even softly plucking the first couple strings of the chord instead of a rest, just to give myself just a little bit of harmonic context going into the song. If you were playing with other people, for instance, if you were playing with a bass player, you know, when the world is open again and we can play with bass players again, they could be playing those beats that we are resting on, and together we would form this bigger sound that's very cool. In the chorus, I've expressed the rhythm of the riff in the chorus chords. So I'm going from a D to an F and back to the D. So again, that same rhythm as the beginning, but now I can strum them with these chords. And then I kind of settle back into that 2 and 4 feel. I'll play through the chorus for you. A cool way to spice up that chorus a little bit if you want to add in that extra little rhythmic bit. The next portion of the tablature focuses on the credence style. So this is very strummy. We're kind of doing this down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up feel. And again, it gets tricky during where that G comes in early. Both times the G comes in early. So it first appears in that main chunk of the verse, right? So we've got the so I've placed some rests in there to kind of help break up those weird rhythmic ideas. So again, rest. Rest. So that's what's happening there. Also notice that on those rests, I am kind of letting my palm land on the strings of the ukulele. So I'm getting this chunk sound out of that, where I'm striking the strings as if I was strumming, or at least close to that kind of motion, and I'm letting my palm fall onto the strings, and it creates this nice percussive sound. It's a tricky move. Don't worry if you can't necessarily get it this time around, but that's what I'm doing when I'm strumming that. So again, I'm striking the strings, and as I'm striking those strings, my palm is landing on the strings down here. So my finger it's a little hard to do at this angle, but that's the motion that's happening. So it's like I'm simultaneously hitting the strings with my palm and striking with my finger, like I would normally strum. That bridge part, the part where the B minor comes in, goes like this. So I've got down, down, and then I rest, and here I'm just going to mute those strings by relaxing my hand, because I'm playing the B minor, all of my fingers, all of my strings are covered. So I've got 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 1, 2, and 3, and 4. A little odd, I know. Let's try it again. 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 1, 2, and 3, and 4. 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 1, 2, and 3, and 4. Do that one more time. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 1, 2, and 3, and 4. And then the next measure, we're just going back to the same idea that we had before. For that D minor and G. And then we move to the chorus. Now the chorus is fairly straightforward here. Again, we're capturing that rhythm that we were expressing in the riff, and we've simplified it a little bit here, right? So I've got D minor for 2 beats, 1, 2, F, and back to D minor. 1, 2, 3, 4. And then we follow that up in the next measure, going back to that strumming idea of it. I'm going to play through the verse and chorus of the Creedence style strum here, so you can hear what that all sounds like in context. 1, 2, 3, 4. Obviously, some of these patterns are going to be a little bit more difficult to sing along to than others. So maybe if you want to do the more complicated stuff, maybe playing that as an accompaniment to either someone else or to a recording, rather than trying to play and sing solo. There are a lot of cool things that you can do mixing and matching all of these parts. Again, whenever we can be in the same room together again, it will be nice to be able to combine parts. Okay, you play this and I'll play this, and see how it all comes together. It's pretty rad what you can come up with. You can kind of like pick your favorite part and throw that into the mix. All right, let's play through the final verse of the song. People say believe half of what you see, nah, 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 what you hear. I can't help being confused. If it's true, please tell me, dear. Do you plan to let me go for the other guy you loved before? Oh, I heard it through the grapevine. Not much longer will you be mine. Baby, I heard it through the grapevine. And I'm just about to lose my mind. Honey, honey, yeah. In the end, you can kind of rock out on either just strumming the D chord or playing the riff. If I'm singing, I like to play just the chord. Honey, I know that you're letting me go. I heard it through the grapevine. Heard it through the grapevine. It kind of does a little ad-libby-ness as you're going out. And of course, if you're doing the Creedence version, then you want to put a guitar solo like between every verse and make sure it lasts like 11 minutes. You're good to go. So that's the song. Again, it's a relatively simple, straightforward song with a couple of those rhythmic curveballs thrown in there, and of course, try to sound like Marvin Gaye is not that easy. But if you do, record it and send it to me. I'd love to hear it. So I hope you have fun with this tune, and I hope you are well and safe, and I can't wait to be playing in the same room with you again. So until that time comes, I will talk to you online next week. Take care.